Hi, I'm Solène Tircuir, sociologist, global health expert, and immigrant storyteller.
And I'm Sacha Ledon, entrepreneur, startup advisor, and lifelong connector of founders from every corner of the globe.
Welcome to Beyond Borders, a podcast about what it really means to build a life, a career, or a dream far from home.
Each week, we speak with people who've crossed countries and cultures, sharing the challenges, the breakthroughs, and the unexpected moments in between. That's where the real story begins. Welcome to Beyond Borders. In today's episode, I'm talking with Daniel Zimmermann, a very accomplished venture capital lawyer in Silicon Valley. And he has some great insights that he shares around his career and how to build a successful career in the legal industry, as well as advice for young immigrants coming to the US and how he found his path here and build a successful career. So join in and listen to all these great insights. Hello, I'm Sacha Redon, and this is Beyond Borders, the podcast where we explore the lives and careers of immigrants who build extraordinary journeys in the United States. Today, I'm joined by Daniel Zimmermann, one of the leading venture capital lawyers in Silicon Valley. Daniel studied law in Germany before earning an LLM from UCLA. He spent 9 years at Cooley before becoming a partner at S&R Denton. And for the past 14 years, he has been a partner at WilmerHale, where he now co-chairs the emerging company and venture capital practice. Along the way, he's represented dozens of startups and VC firms in their financing, acquisitions, and exits, and has been consistently recognized by Super Lawyers and Chambers USA as one of the top venture capital and corporate lawyers in California. From Germany to LA to Silicon Valley boardrooms, Daniel's journey reflects what it means to live beyond borders. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Sasha.
Excited to have you and have this discussion. Jumping right in, you first came to the US in 1985 as a high school exchange student in Oregon. And you told me the story, you even met your wife in your very first French class during that time, your future wife, I should say. Can you tell us a bit about that experience and how it kind of influenced your future return to the US?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a very interesting story. First of all, you're totally dating me, which is fine. I'm an older gentleman at this point, hopefully, 57 at this point. But yes, I was a foreign exchange student in 1985, and I graduated from high school in 1986 from Beaverton High School, which is a suburb of Portland, Oregon, and yeah, it was a very interesting journey, and indeed, I did meet my wife. Unfortunately, late wife. My wife passed away 5.5 years ago, but I met her in my first French class in AP French, and and also, by the way, so my first period of ever in high school, and that's where I met her. And then I saw her again in my Spanish class, and it was like obviously meant to be, I guess. Uh, but yeah, but it is a long time ago. I believe it had a lot to do with my curiosity. I was very interested. I always have been, as a teenager, thinking about going abroad, going somewhere else, not living in Germany. And I think, as you probably know, Germany is a very small country. I mean, it's very easy to immediately trip a wire and you're in a different country. And I actually grew right up on I grew up on the French border, and my first foreign language was French, with full immersion in early on, and then at a later point in time introducing English as my first and my second foreign language. But the the curiosity stemmed from a lot of travel with my parents, all in Europe, nowhere in outside of Europe, and mostly France. First of all, it was close, but also because it's beautiful and you could pretty much see anything when you're in France. The mountains, the ocean, the Mediterranean, very different from the Atlantic, Pyrenees. I mean, we are very lucky to have grown up there. And I also spent a lot of time in Corsica, which of course is a beautiful island, not only a beautiful island, but also has a lot of history. And it's very lucky to have grown up in a family that was very curious. My father was a history teacher. And so history and geography teacher actually, and so I always had, in wherever we went, we always had to go to like all kinds of archaeological sites, and and but coming to the new world, if you will, coming to Oregon was very, very different.
Mm.
I was struck by um, the pioneer spirit, and I know this proverbial pioneer spirit, but it really was just so amazing to come to Oregon and see for my own, with my own eyes, how different people were thinking about things, and then also how it seemed like at first little history there was, because there are no a lot of archaeological ruins or anything, but that's not true, because of course there's a long history of Native American um, uh, cultures and structures, and I was for the very first time learned more about that, which is entirely different from how people look at things in Europe. It's very European centric. So I was just lucky to be there and be in a new world and learn a lot of new things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that sounds great. I mean, I'm biased for obviously from France myself, so I totally understand the attraction of France, but it's a whole different world out here in US and Oregon. And I guess it wasn't just your future wife that attracted you back to the US, but a lot of other things seemed like draw you over here, drew you back. And actually you then went back to Germany, but you came back to study at UCLA. So
Mhm.
and then you stayed, I guess. So what
Yes.
brought you back and what made you stay in the US for so long?
Yeah. So all good things for a lot of men start with girlfriends, wives, and significant others. But for anyone, I guess. But it was certainly a big attraction for me to come back and be reunited with my late wife with Deborah at the time, who had actually been a Fulbright scholar to come to Germany, and so she overstayed her scholarship and then ultimately came back to UCLA and went to law school there. And I was lucky enough to get into the LLM program, which was a very small program at the time. I think we had a total of 12 or 13 students, something like that.
You followed each other back and
We
forth a bit, I
we
guess.
really did follow each other,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, because that was a stint after we were in Berlin and then Freiburg, my hometown, and then we ultimately came back here, but came back to the West Coast.
Mhm.
But UCLA was, for me, it was eye-opening because I had come from a academically rigorous but quite traditional environment where it was difficult to talk to professors. They were lecturing. There was not a lot of discussion. I remember very well when I first came to UCLA Law School, I always contacted the secretary of one of the professors, our LLM um, mentors, and then at one point he said to me, Dan, you're making it very complicated. Why don't you just walk into my office? We have an open door policy. Like, and I was really shocked, not because I didn't know about this culture in America, but the fact that he introduced himself as Joel. His name is Professor Joel, Dr. Joel Handler, who was wonderful professor. Unfortunately, I think late Professor Handler, but he was someone who just showed me how different, it made me experience how different academic life in America was. And so I felt very much at home immediately. People were very warm. It was a small class. It was you weren't just a number, and I felt like from my side, it was just an amazing opportunity. The only thing that was, of course, to get to finance all of this. At the time, and by the way, I still remember my tuition number. It was 17,888. And of course, in today's number, people would look at that like, oh my God, that was a fantastic deal. I do think my family thought I was absolutely insane and crazy. And I really didn't know how to finance it. And we figured it out. My wife, my then girlfriend, and I figured out how to do that. And yeah, I was lucky also because Deborah was American and she sponsored me with a K-1 visa, which you probably have heard about. It's a fiancé visa. You know, had this whole the interview, and I went through all of that. I went through all of the interviews, and it was very funny to some extent because I felt like, you know, they were. It was a process that I took seriously, but I thought, well, wait a minute, but we've been together for so long, and of course they understand it. But it was a rigorous process, and but I immediately got my relatively quickly got my green card, which was fantastic because it allowed me to work. And yeah, again, in that respect, again, very privileged to be honest, because when I see how difficult it is for many immigrants to come here and get a work permit, I was very lucky.
Yeah, there's so many different paths to the visas, but all of them are complicated in their own way and getting more complicated. You know, funny enough, I had very similar experience coming from France, and I also went to UCLA for my undergrad on my my end, but it was very eye-opening. You know, it's like such a different system of learning and education than exists in France, and I imagine in Germany as well. Professors going by their first names, and you know, in French we have vouvoiement, like it's all very formal and it's much more open, and you know, you can discuss and go into open hour office hours. So um, that got me hooked as well to American education at least. Um, so it was also, for me at least, a very tough transition the first year, culturally and adapting to people, to jokes, many things. I thought I spoke English, and so I'm good and I know everything. And then, wow, what a shock. So I wonder, you know, how was that adaptation, and what were some tough adjustments you may have had to make in the beginning?
Yeah, you know, I mean, absolutely right. No, I was lucky because I had a little preview with 1 year as a foreign exchange student. And so that was a little bit, maybe a little bit different. I had a little bit of an introduction to popular culture because, you know, when you're in high school, you need to be popular, right? So, but, but all that, kidding aside, you know, it was difficult because it is a different, just not just a different academic culture, but of course also, you know, culture around how you interact with people and what you know and what you don't know. So strangely enough, I even had sometimes even struggled with certain instructions or sometimes even some tests because they were around American popular culture, which was funny, but it didn't even register with me what they were talking about. I remember one time we had a law school exam that was all around Gilligan's Island. I didn't even know
Mm.
what Gilligan's Island. I thought afterwards, I remember I talked to some people. I said, "Hey, that's a really funny story." It's like, well, you don't know Gilligan's Island, and you don't know these characters, and you know, and similarly, baseball plays a very big role, as most of us know. You know, there's lots of like baseball language that finds itself into regular conversations. You know, it's a home run. You got to take a swing. You know, you hit it out of the ballpark. You're on first base. You know, you're like, you know, anyway, it's lots of like you do need to do pinch hitting. I mean, you need to understand some of that. Obviously, you don't need to become a baseball expert, but I think there's a lot of American culture, sports, and otherwise, it has sort of found itself into just everyday life. And it's not, it doesn't make it difficult, but it's like it's a whole new thing you got to learn. I would also say, I think one thing for many people from Europe or Asia, I think it's more that we, you know, we live in more formal societies in some ways. And you come to America and especially the West Coast, it seems all like super laissez-faire, like laid back, everyone's cool and this and that. But people work hard, right? I mean,
Mhm.
don't be fooled. I mean, it's sometimes you feel like, oh, it's, you know, oh, this was hey, you know, again, yeah, I'm Joel, I'm Jim, I'm this, I'm that. But there's a different type of like level of formality and layer of authority that can find itself into that conversation or into a relationship building, right? Which shouldn't be underestimated. And again, still, I love the fact that it's very open. People love being open, and they are, but there are certain things that you need to learn as a foreigner. And I'm always remembering a movie by I think it was Jim Jarmusch. I think I'm not sure whether it was one of those sort of cool new movies in the 90s. And I remember there was an Italian immigrant, and he was always walking around with a little booklet, and he always wrote down little idioms because he wanted to make sure he knew, oh, this is a funny thing. I need to write it down. And I think that's, you know, that's something that I learned. The other thing I would say, Sasha, which really surprised me when coming from a European university, it started out really slow, and then it really started up, and then you had big exams at the end, and those were like the only things that really matter, things that really mattered. I think that's really different in American law schools, because the very first thing I found out, which was kind of by happenstance, I walked by the old blackboard back in the day, and all of a sudden, the day before classes started, there was all these reading assignments. There were like 3 books that had been already assigned I had to read before the classes started, and all these cases I was supposed to learn about. And I was like, wait a minute, we haven't even started law school. What? Why do I need to read this? And I scrambled, ran to the bookstore, got all my books, and read pretty much until like 3 a.m. in the morning, so that I was prepared at least to walk into that class. And that really surprised me, because I didn't realize that you kind of like, things start before you even get started. And I think people really, it's no joke. I mean, people don't lose time. Immediately you jump into things. I mean, there may be a little bit of easing into certain things, into certain matters, but they mean business. And people mean business also because people pay a lot of money for it. And so you're like, okay, let's go, so it's very different.
Yeah, I think there's a few things you touched upon that are I think super important for anyone coming to the US. And I think like what you mentioned about sports is such a huge part of culture here, and specific sports like baseball, basketball, American football,
Yeah.
and people like it's a great way to fit in quickly here if you learn about a sport and you can talk about it with people, and it's an easy kind of conversation starter. And I think
Yeah.
much more than I mean, in Europe, we have, football, like the regular football, right? But here, I think like there's another level of how people are involved with sports and how much they want to talk about it and reference it. So that's a great way to
Mhm.
kind of get into the culture quickly. And then on your other point around, how hard people work, even though like there's a surface level chillness and relaxation or how people interact, but under that surface, people are working really hard, right? Like it's super competitive. I think is the analogy of the duck or the goose that looks very smooth on the water, but it's pedaling like crazy underwater, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I felt that. I feel that, and even more so maybe in the Bay Area than even LA. It's people are open and want to hang out and talk, and you can kind of talk to anyone, but behind it, you got to back it up with work, whether it's in your studies or in your career. Um, that in the end is what really shows
Yeah.
your value and continued relationship with people. So
Agreed.
about career, after your studies in LA, you decided to stay here or at least come to the Bay Area and work, and you've built your whole career here. So I just want to kind of think what were some big turning points. Um, what were some like Rudolf Boita from Sequoia would say some crucible moments in your career that got you to stay here and build such a successful career?
Yeah. I mean, lots of different things, right? So on the one hand, of course, trying to build a career as a family, right? When you're have a spouse and then a kid on the way relatively soon after that makes you scramble. Let's put it like that. You got to pay the bills for sure. I mean, there is actually a big aspect. I mean, even just today, I mean, not to get off track here, but I saw the latest Wall Street Journal rankings, college rankings, like that just came out today, I think. And it's interesting because people look at an ROI, like the return of investment, right? So
Mhm.
if you put how quickly can you actually make money back from how much you put into your education? I think that's a very
Yeah.
different viewpoint. Like, I'm just thinking about how I approached things when I was back in Europe, and also how a lot of my friends and family approached it. It's like, oh, you get an education because it's cool, it's important, and obviously it's wonderful to get an education. But the price tag that's attached to it, it's quite a different price tag. It's not free, and it costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of value in it. And so now you're flipping it and you're saying, well, what am I going to do with my career? And, by the way, there are lots of different ways to have a career, right? Obviously, you can be an academic. It's very different from what I do. I was very interested very quickly in the business aspects of law, or I would say not the business of law, right? But like the corporate law as a field that allowed me to do work with companies that I found really fascinating and interesting. I was, again, lucky, if you will, to kind of fall into something quickly, but it was not an easy way to go about it. I can tell you that, because I first wanted to get started in Los Angeles, and I was a rookie. I was a total rookie, right? I was a double rookie to some extent, not to use more sports terms, but had not really had any meaningful work experience in Europe. Didn't have much,
Mhm.
meaningful work experience in America. It's just some clerking and things like that. And now trying to find a job was not easy. I think I have about 150 to 160 rejection letters. Back in the day, we wrote letters, and we actually got a response too. They don't ghost you. They just send you like, hey, you're sorry about that, but you're not going to get a job here, and not going to get an interview. It was very difficult, but ultimately I felt I was tenacious. I also didn't take no for an answer. I think that's important. And I also believe that if you really want something really badly, you work extra hard, right? It doesn't mean that everything's going to fall your way, but it will pay off, hopefully, in the end. And what I learned is also sometimes you got to start from the bottom, kind of what I had to do. I mean, I don't want to, let's say I actually worked for some cool firms, but they were not necessarily where I wanted to be at the time, but rather it was a stepping stool for me. It was something I was able to do that allowed me to gain experience and then get into a position where I could ultimately be successful in applying for a major law firm, and that's when I got landed at Cooley, right? And I remember when I got a couple of interviews up here. I actually got some interviews at Wilson Sonsini. I got an interview at Perkins Coie, and then back at the time, which is no longer, but then Cooley. And I was very just fascinated by technology at the time, and what was happening in that world in 1999. You can imagine there were like tech IPO after tech IPO after tech IPO, and it was a great time to look for a job as well. So I also want to acknowledge the fact that I was very lucky from a timing perspective, to fall into that. You make your own luck because you have to position yourself in at the right to be there at the right time. And you may not be lucky enough to that immediately happens, but that's what happened to me. And I was able to get a job at Cooley at the time as a second year associate, and immediately was sort of lucky enough to get put on to cool, interesting matters that really helped me develop as a lawyer and find my groove, if you will, and really kind of understand how technology companies were financed and how to be an effective lawyer. And I learned from so many amazing, amazing practitioners or people who've done this for decades, how to do that. And I just was drinking from the fire hose, as you can imagine. It's just what you have to do in the beginning, right? Because if you don't know much about what you're doing, you better learn quickly. Which brings me to one other thing, is that as an immigrant, I think a lot of us suffer from what a lot of people call the imposter syndrome. And meaning that you feel like, oh, maybe I'm not good enough, or I don't know enough, and they're going to find out that I don't know that much. And after a while, you realize, of course, that you probably know just as much as many others who are locals, if you will, or people who grew up in America and who are American, and went through the education system here. But it is something that keeps you on your toes. And I think it makes you really worry about, are you good enough for this? And it probably makes you a better professional and attorney because you work really hard. For example, I mean, just one example, Sasha, right? If you're not a native speaker, people always worry, oh, does this person actually speak English well enough to be an effective communicator? Because we're dealing with very important things and so on. And so if you make a mistake as a non-native speaker, it's like the first exam. It's almost confirmation bias. Of course, made a mistake because it's not a native speaker. And then you look for more things, right? It's like a red flag. Whereas if an American native speaker makes a mistake, like my youngest son, for example, constantly says, I'm good. You're well, but it doesn't matter. For him, everyone knows that he's a native speaker. And of course, he's not going to be challenged on that. I think that is a big thing for many of us who are non-native speakers, and that you feel like maybe you're inadequate or you don't know as much as other people. and you have to make it up, and you really do. And I think the same thing, I always hear that a lot from women, gender bias, right? That women have to work harder to be in the same place as a male. I mean, or if you're coming from a diverse background or a minority background, and same thing. I think there's sometimes the stigma that's attached to you. And as a foreigner, I think you have the same thing. Uh, Obviously, I'm white and male, and I'm not trying to say I've been very privileged in so many different ways, but I'm just saying, as a foreigner, I think you have often this feeling like, am I cutting it or am I not?
I think that's completely right, Daniel. Like people, it's for the same mistake because of your background, because you're not from here, the kind of assignment of blame or fault will be stronger as opposed to giving the benefit of the doubt of like, oh, it's a typo, it's a mistake because he's American, he knows what he's doing. But oh, you're German, no, he doesn't know. And you don't get that benefit of the doubt. So I guess you do have to
Right.
compensate for that in many ways. I think you touched on a lot of important points, and you said you were lucky in some ways, and I think luck plays a part, of course, in every successful journey. But also, you kind of touched upon it, like perseverance. Like you applied and you got 160 plus rejections, so you kept going. You didn't give up. So I think, as you said, you create your own luck a bit, or you give your own opportunity, because you could give up after 50 or 100, and then you wouldn't be lucky. So
Yep.
you're kind of giving the opportunity to yourself to be lucky. Now that you have been lucky and perseverant and kind of at the top of your career, looking back to that whole journey, now being a partner for 14 years or more at Wilmer Hale, it's a very competitive field. It's a tough place to be, especially in the Bay Area. What do you see as some of the keys to your success and longevity in your role as a partner?
Good question. Sometimes I ask myself, like, how did I end up here? But also, I think you have to sometimes engage in some self-reflection about these things. And the one thing, again, coming back to what we're talking about as well, is that, being a foreigner here or someone who came, I'm now American, by the way, also I have an American citizenship, but it is really important to kind of always remember where you came from. And what I mean by that is that it grounds you. I always feel that I have a very strong connection to foreign founders. And not because, I've never been a founder, to be clear, but I kind of feel this connection, cultural connection almost, that they are struggling. They're having a hard time for sure in the beginning, trying to figure out like how to move things forward. They're seeking advice. So from my perspective, I'm there and I'm very happy, to be in a situation where I can advise, and that keeps me going, and that's actually sort of, I believe, something that's also been the elixir or the juice that I needed or that I need every day. And I'm still excited about, what's happening in new companies. And I love the energy that people bring to the table. When I work with a new founding team or a founder, a solo founder, there's just something there that makes me kind of love life and love work and feel like we're doing something that's important and that's refreshing. It's definitely not same old, same old. It never has been for me. I probably would stop. I should, and I hope I would stop working if it felt that way. I think there are certain situations clearly where I feel like, okay, deja vu all over again, to speak in Yogi Berra's terms, not a baseball idiom. But if it's deja vu all over again, meaning this is something that I recognize, it's more empowering than the fact that it's like, oh, I don't want to do that again. It's empowering that because you see patterns. And I think seeing pattern recognition is something that I think I can bring to the table. And I think that is why maybe, hopefully, that's why I'm successful, that I'm trying to be also someone who is honest. And, when as an attorney in particular, you're often asked, like, oh, can you give me an answer like about this? Isn't this like that? It's like, no, actually. And, giving an answer, an honest answer, and sometimes giving a tough answer, that's maybe not the right, way to answer, like not what someone, the founder in particular, or company counsel or CEO wants to hear. That's also important, right? And I've been sometimes in situations where people are not happy to hear that, right? Well, I just need you to tell me this. And it's like, well, you're not hiring me for that. The most important thing I think is that you have to really play the long game. And it has always been that way, right? It's a situation where short term gains are usually like, they just have short legs, right? And I think that's really important. You want to give people, you want to be genuine, and you're not trying to take advantage of particular situations or somehow roughshod over people, etc., but rather be a real partner, but be someone who folks see as a real advisor, as a business advisor. Recently, funnily enough, Sasha, recently I had a situation where someone called me and said, "Oh, we're going through all of our vendor agreements, and so we're like looking to do all this like different consolidation, and we want to do some culling and then also some discounting and so on." I was like, "Look, that's fine. If you see me as a vendor, I think we should stop right here, right?" Because if I'm one of your vendors, and of course it was loosely used, that term, but if you see someone as a vendor, then that is, you go into the marketplace and you check around, and I'm not stupid, of course there are tons, it's very competitive, as you said, and there's lots of different attorneys, and they're fantastic people. And I also am the first one to tell people like, hey, I think for this type of work, I think you should probably use someone different, like maybe even a boutique, for example. If you look at immigration, or you look at trademark or patent prosecution, there's often a situation where other people are better. And I think that's what people really want. They want to get an honest answer. But they also want to be a partner, and you want to be a business partner, someone whose advice is valued, and it's not just like a commodity that gets fact checked against, Copilot or ChatGPT. And by the way, I'm always happy when people do fact check me or try to come back, because I sometimes also then see why people are asking certain questions or not. But that is what keeps me in the game. And again, as I mentioned, I love what I'm doing, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be working with some of the best and the brightest people in the world.
A very, very exciting place to be. Daniel, I think you're exactly right. You're in some ways a vendor, and you service provider to these companies, right? But it's much more than that, and is the personal, because even the different partner at the same firm will have a different skill set, knowledge network, all these things they bring. And so it's like the personal fit as well, and how you are an advisor, and someone who can sometimes give tough advice, but the right advice, even if it's not always what the client wants to hear. And I think you have a very unique perspective as an immigrant as well. And I kind of wanted to ask you a question to explore kind of the two sides of that. And you touched upon it a bit. But on the one side, it gives you empathy for founders and people coming, especially immigrants, and maybe you have a better way to relate with them, and you can start on a higher kind of ground with them. On the converse side, you may have faced some discrimination or bias as, not, maybe you don't know enough, maybe you don't speak well enough, or things like that. So how have you seen those two sides play in your career?
I mean, I don't think I've been the recipient of too much bias. And then again, I want to acknowledge the fact, I'm a white male, so I think that's already like, sometimes the strange thing is people probably think, oh, he's American, he's white, and he's male, and he's in his position. But the truth is that I have been pigeonholed sometimes. There have been in the past, I've had that happen where when I was an associate, people in the firm at the time, or partner said, "Oh, he's that German guy. Like he does like only like does cross-border deals and international." So you get pigeonholed a little bit probably, and that is something that is hard to fight. You can only do that with work, good work.
And should you fight it, or should you use it to your benefit? Is it something, oh, you got this niche, or does it limit you?
Questions. I agree with you, Sasha. I actually used it as a leverage. I definitely
Mhm.
did, because it was easy for me when you're a young attorney and you're trying to do some business development and get new clients. I mean, some of the lowest hanging fruit are the people like that have some affinity with you,
Mhm.
right? And I think I talk to law students here as well about that. And if you have a German affinity, then maybe you can, do like networking in that German American, group, right? And there are all kinds of affinity groups. Same thing with French and Italian and lots of different groups out of Asia that I know of. I mean, there's a very famous one for like Southeast Asian is like Thai, the Indus Entrepreneur Connection, I think, which is fantastic organization, has been around for a long time. A lot of fantastic people have come out of that or have networked in that. So I think you're right. I mean, I think you can use it as a leverage and a jumping off point. And then, through that, you develop a reputation, or you develop a reputation generally, and then you move on from there, and you just show through excellent work and excellent work ethic that you're someone people should be working for, especially as a service provider, right? I mean, I think that's important. But beyond that, I think it does give you, to some extent, it's actually strange. You're right. It gives you an edge. It gives you a little something extra, right? If, for example, if someone is interviewing two separate counselors, a bake-off, and someone has the extra, like, or doing cross-border work, or has a specific language facility, all of that is super helpful. And, there's nothing more powerful than pulling clients aside and saying a few words in their native language. It's reaffirming. It's sometimes also something and it's not code switching. It's more like, it's really reaffirming, hey, putting it into a different language. Because often, as an attorney, you are actually really very much a translator of sorts. A translator, even for Americans, right? In the English language. Hey, this is what this means. And especially, of course, when there's a language barrier on top of that.
Right. That's very interesting. And I think, yeah, you can use it to build your first layer, and then you can transcend your niche, hopefully, as you prove yourself. That's great advice, I think, for young folks trying to get into it. You work with so many startups, with so many VCs. You've seen kind of very innovative people, technologies, companies, and yet you're on the law side, and as a lawyer, maybe not as involved in the innovation. How has that kind of influenced you, or have you taken things away from all these innovators that you use in your day-to-day life? Has it changed your role as a lawyer?
Well, it would be, it'd be lying to tell you that AI has not absolutely had a huge impact on what's happening in the legal industry, for better or for worse. I think for the better, to be clear, because, and I know this sounds crazy, but I remember the days when people used fax machines, right? and we're switching to email, which is insane, but it was really happening at the time. And of course, technology has always played a big role in our practice. But the one thing I've taken away, like, whenever you think that you're on top of your game, you got to change. Whenever you think you feel like, oh, I got this, there's probably someone else. When you think, oh, I have no competitors, I'm like doing really well. It's like, no, there are people nipping at your heels, right? and how do you use technology? I mean, I think we've all learned how to use more and more technology every day, all the time. I mean, it starts with word recommendations. It starts with grammar checks. It's like with,
Hmm.
using precedents, running it through AI, doing, for example, summaries of what you've just told people, using all those kinds of tools that are hopefully not just helpful, but really enhancing the work product. And, when I think about it, like, I still remember, like, 25 years ago, people say, oh, can you run this red line for us? You have this great fancy software. I'm like, yes, I can run this red line for you. But it was a big game changer for people where they didn't have to, like, compare things. Yeah, it was an easy way to see changes and things like that. And so, with all that, you have to introduce technology into virtually everything that you do, and also to be more productive, because we can't do work without using technology. I mean, how can you collect signatures across the world, right? I mean, these days people can be on the top of a mountain and sign a very, very important document, and would have to time that type of stuff. I mean, all these things are have led me to
Hmm.
always look at opportunities where we can introduce technology to make the product delivery more efficient, but also more timely. You look like an idiot, frankly, if you don't use tools that everyone else is using, right? And you learn from your clients.
I do want to ask you though, transition from fax to email, I'm sure is a big disruption, but it's kind of doing the same thing more efficiently and quicker. I think, with AI, there may be a bigger shift than that. And people are talking about, especially at lower level, more junior, like associates in a law firm, like, or paralegals even, like jobs that are maybe more could be replaced at some point with AI. Like, how do you see that changing and evolving in the next few years or decades?
No, I mean, I fully agree. I think it's going to be an amazing ride. I would think that a lot of legal work will be commoditized.
Mm.
And I think, I mean, actually, maybe be bold, and maybe it's not even bold enough. 90% of legal work that traditionally has been legal work maybe may go away and may be replaced. But, and this is I think where I just don't know enough yet about the capabilities of AI, which surprise me every day. Where does the judgment come in, and where does an operator come in, and where does your human knowledge and aptitude of assessing a particular situation come in, and how does that influence how do you go about a particular situation? For example, I mean, right now, right, you can use AI and it can spit out a perfectly written contract for
Mhm.
what I would call a Joe Schmo situation for particular things that are replicable. What it doesn't do is it doesn't take into account, and I know you can prompt it, of course, but it doesn't take into account negotiation leverage. It doesn't
Mhm.
take into account very specific items that may or may not be picked up by the AI agent, right? Or that can't be properly put into words that are like, or at least at this point, maybe a later point in time, sort of certain things that are actually very important, right? So, I wonder where that comes in, but it leads to the same. In the end, it leads to the same effect that you're describing. More junior people are going to have a harder time
Mhm.
being sort of valuable, right, in these types of transactions. So, and I don't want to sound like this, but like a more senior person is probably more valuable. But they also, by the way, there's a tricky thing. Junior people, more junior folks, junior associates, would be much better at using AI versus the more senior people who may not be able to use AI or prompt AI as well, but who
Right.
have more of an understanding of a particular situation and fact and pattern recognition and things how this in this particular situation what the outcome should be. And I've seen some pretty ridiculous outcomes, right? When I try to use AI and looked at AI and then asked more questions and got sort of complete opposite answers after I prompted it in a different way. So, I think the real big issue will be design thinking in the broadest sense. You have to understand how to work with AI. And that's why we all have to embrace AI. AI is not going to go away. We need to embrace it. How
Mhm.
is it going to affect our profession? Profoundly, no question. How exactly? I don't know, because I think the level of work that I don't want to sound like this, but the level of work that we do is pretty high.
Mhm.
So we're not seeing a huge impact yet on the work that we are asked to do, but we are seeing a huge impact on how clients interact with us, right?
Mm.
We sometimes get very sophisticated questions from people who have absolutely no background in a particular matter. And in certain situations, it's very helpful. In other situations, it's such a distraction. And sometimes not just that, it actually will cost the client more time. And we have to deal with that, by the way, because we can't make the client look like an idiot, right? So we have to okay, that's not an issue. That's not a problem. Here are problems, right? And it's very difficult because how do you explain that to someone who doesn't really have a background? It is, and by the way, recently had a really good discussion with an MD. And that MD, I explained what was happening in our profession. And he said, "Welcome to my world. Dr. Google has been running us for 20 years. For 20 years, we've been dealing with people who are self-diagnosing, who
Uh-huh.
know how to do the best surgery, who know the best surgeon, who have done all their research and come to us and tell us like what we have to do."
Mhm.
That's a new world for lawyers, a relatively new world, but it's an interesting one. And it hopefully, we have to find ways to work with all of that. And frankly, having someone who's more informed about an issue is good. It's much better than someone who's showing up and doesn't really know anything about anything. But they could be misled, and you have to kind of quickly snuff out why they've been misled or why they're thinking it the wrong way. Whole new world and a whole new art, how to deal with things. And then also like, explaining to clients that this is actually something valuable that you're providing because they just got this amazing answer for nothing, right? And they got it very fast and
And
they had to
is
wait.
it relevant? And
Yeah,
is
and they
it the
had to
right
wait.
question? Is it like
Exactly.
these are the
Yes.
points you can
Yeah.
direct them towards gently without telling them outright they're just wrong or idiots. Obviously, you never want to say shit like that. But and I think you're exactly right as well with the as a young professional, your differentiator can be your skill with AI and how well you know it and how well you can use it and leverage it, as opposed to a more experienced professional and their expertise and knowledge. You can't just compete with that right off the bat, but you can compete and be better and excel at the
Yes.
interaction with AI
Right.
and leverage that to hopefully launch your career. So I we're coming to the end here, so I want to kind of wrap it up and with a final question around what would you suggest for young immigrants or people thinking of coming to the US to start a legal career here? Should they do it, and if so, any advice on how?
And another really excellent question. So, would I do it? Would I become a lawyer again? Yes. I mean, I think, and would I go to law school here? Yes. I think it's a really, really amazing opportunity for anyone anywhere in the world who is looking to do interesting work. I'm not going to get political, but it's a challenging time in many different ways. I would say that it's a very unique opportunity because strangely enough, even with all the pressures that we have, lawyers play a very large role in American business.
Mhm.
And with all the badgering of like, the ambulance chasers, this and that, there's all kinds of lawyers that give us a bad name, I guess. But there's a lot of respect for the law and for the legal process, and even an understanding that this is going to cost money and it's going to be something hopefully, ultimately valuable. Now that's different in litigation. Litigation is a lawyer's dream to some extent come true because they get to work in their world and nobody else can interfere because there's two opposing counsels, there's a judge and all that. But it's a very different world. And of course, that in and of itself is a fantastic opportunity for anyone. Where I'm playing, I'm just sort of giving you a little sliver of what my world is, right? On the business side and the corporate side, I think it's a fantastic opportunity because um, the world the world will always get small. It will always get smaller. And and what's interesting too, there's actually sort of enhanced regulatory scrutiny for almost anything and everything. And so there will be a need for people who know how to navigate that very difficult obstacle course of getting something done, right? And I think there's another uniqueness about like the American legal profession. People really feel like they're deal makers on the corporate side, and you feel like you're part of the business team and you want to get something across the finish line, not only because everyone's going to be happy and you hopefully get paid, but because that is sort of the attitude, and it's very different from sort of a memo writing background. Like people write, oh, this is like, let me tell you right what the law is. And I'm not suggesting that in other cultures this is really very much this kind of culture is sort of emanating, like going into lots of different other parts of the world. But I think something that is very much practiced here, and I ultimately see that when you come here, you learn to become a problem solver more than anything, and a business advisor and a problem solver. And of course the legal stuff has to be right, but that is what you can learn here. And I think that's what continues to be make American law schools and then also the legal profession generally here attractive for foreign entrants and foreign candidates.
That's great. Still a very exciting time to be in the US and to be a lawyer here and to build a career here. Um,
Yeah,
Daniel, thank you so much for this great discussion and sharing your path and your life very candidly. I really appreciate it.
very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond Borders and joining us to celebrate the journeys the successes, and the stories of immigrants making their mark in the US. If this story inspired you, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. You can also find more information at beyondborderspod.com. Your support helps us keep making and sharing these inspiring stories. Until next time, keep going, keep growing, and go beyond borders.